having the assistance of the Department of Justice lab team and the United States Marshal Task Force and the Gilroy Police Department. Although there is still some work to be done on this case, I'm pleased to announce the arrest of 2 individuals today for the murder of 9-year-old Janessa Ramirez. 22-year-old Brian Laurice Cooks of Fresno was arrested on January 28th for parole violation, interviewed and booked into Fresno County Jail on that parole violation. 19-year-old Isaac Cordell Stafford of Fresno was arrested on January 29th at 10:40 p.m. and interviewed also by our detectives. At 12:30 a.m. this morning, both Cooks and Stafford were charged with the murder of Janessa Ramirez. Investigators have determined that Stafford and possibly a second person left a residence at 2531 North Marks, which is on the northwest corner of Marks and Clinton. This is the Ross Gardens apartments. They were driving a 2-door gray Dodge Challenger at that time. They were traveling southbound on Marks at a low rate of speed when they saw Brian Cooks, who was riding on a skateboard northbound on the sidewalk west of Marks and north of Clinton. Cooks and Stafford are rival gang members. Immediately upon seeing each other, both of them were armed with firearms. We had firearms in the vehicle, as well as Cooks was armed as well. And immediately an exchange of gunfire occurred between Cooks and the occupants of the Dodge Challenger. Approximately 4 rounds were fired from the Dodge Challenger towards Cooks. Cooks was crouched down behind a red vehicle that was parked on the street. All 4 of those rounds fired from the vehicle struck that red vehicle which Cooks was hiding behind. Cooks also fired at Stafford and the second person in the vehicle. And that happened to be the only round that was fired by Cooks. It did miss the intended target. It traveled approximately 270 yards and struck Janessa Ramirez in the stomach. Janessa was standing with her mother in front of a laundromat. Janessa told her mother that she felt a burning sensation in her stomach and fell to the ground where her mother, Stacy, held her. Janessa was then taken to Community Regional Medical Center, but unfortunately did not survive her injury. The Dodge Challenger fled southbound on Marks and then westbound on Clinton out of the area. Suspect Brian Cooks ran through the apartment complex and also out of the area. Based on the investigation, it appears the reason for this feud between Cooks and Stafford stemmed from a shooting that occurred in 2012 in the area of Ashland and Parkway. The person arrested for that shooting is an individual named DeAndre Robinson, and he was sent to prison for this shooting. Stafford happened to be a key witness in that case, was labeled a snitch on Facebook, and there has been this ongoing feud since that time. During this investigation, the Fresno Police Department received 44 tips. 10 of those tips provided key information that identified both Brian Cooks and Isaac Stafford as being involved in this shooting. Both Cooks and Stafford were followed by the Street Violence Section TAC team of the Fresno Police Department, as well as the United States Marshals Task Force, both in the Fresno and the Gilroy area. They were followed during this entire week. Extensive surveillance was able to identify several locations where search warrants were ultimately served by our investigators. 6 search warrants were served, 5 of those search warrants being in Fresno, 1 of those search warrants being in Gilroy. And on January 28th, during the surveillance of Cooks and a second suspect, 22-year-old Devontae Murphy, a traffic stop was made on both of those individuals in the vehicle. They were detained, and Murphy was found to have in his waistband a 9mm handgun, which is believed to be the weapon that that Brian Cooks used when he fired at the Challenger, missed, and ultimately struck Janessa Ramirez. That firearm is currently being tested by the Department of Justice, but we have substantial information to believe that that was the weapon that was used. Murphy, who was not involved in the shooting that evening, was arrested for being an ex-felon in possession of a firearm. We did notice that Brian Cooks had taken steps to alter his identity, had grown out some facial hair, as well as had cut his hair, and obviously knew that the police had been looking for them, or him, but was not aware that we had been following him for the past week. Cooks was questioned for several hours by our investigators. Ultimately, he denied any involvement. He was untruthful with our investigators, but ultimately he admitted to firing one round from the 9mm handgun toward Stafford and missing the intended target. And he did tell detectives that he knew the round that he had fired was the round that ultimately struck and killed Janessa Ramirez. And we have substantial evidence to be able to corroborate that as well. Cooks also said that the gun we recovered from Murphy was the gun, in fact, that he used that evening. And he stated that the reason he was only able to fire one round was not because he didn't try to fire multiple rounds, but that the gun had jammed after the first round was fired. We are very fortunate because with the close proximity of the individuals next to Janessa, we could have had other people shot as well. Stafford was also questioned by detectives after being arrested in Gilroy. During that 5-hour interview, Stafford, although he was untruthful at the beginning, he ultimately did admit to being in the Dodge Challenger when the exchange of gunfire occurred between or with Cooks. We are currently looking for a third individual who may or may not have been with Stafford during the night of the shooting. We're not going to be releasing that name at this point, simply because we do not want it to hinder our investigation. I can tell you that there were over 1,600 hours of investigative time put in by our detectives, and there will be additional hours spent in the coming weeks as we prepare for this case with the district attorney's office. But there has been extensive work. These individuals have worked tirelessly, and I do want to take the time right now to say thank you to Lieutenant Mark Salazar, Sergeant Dave Ramos, Detective Adrian Alvarez, and Detective Tony Rivera for their countless efforts in this case, as well as all of the other agencies that have assisted us with this case. I do want to show you, there's a diagram behind me. First off, you see the photo to the left. You have Isaac Stafford, who was the individual that was in the Dodge Challenger, and then the firearm that was recovered from Devontae Murphy when he was in the car with Brian Cooks. That was the, if you could back up a second, the Dodge was the vehicle that we seized. Again, Isaac Stafford, that was in the Dodge Challenger at that time, and Devontae Murphy, the firearm that was used, and then we have a photograph there of Brian Cooks as well. That was the vehicle that was used that evening. And Brian Cooks, the individual that fired the one round that struck and killed Janessa. And there's a diagram behind me. And you can see from this diagram, this is Marks Avenue, Clinton here to the south. This is the area in which Brian Cooks was hiding behind a red vehicle. Janessa and her mother were standing here in this strip mall, just north of Clinton. The vehicle in which Stafford was in drove southbound on Marks, saw Brian Cooks on a skateboard going in this direction, and that's when the exchange of gunfire happened. Brian Cooks fired one round from this direction, ultimately went 270 yards and struck Janessa. At this time, I'd like to have our mayor come up and speak. We had an opportunity in my office right now, to pray with the family. We do have members of the family there, and obviously Stacy Gonzalez, who's with us today. So, Mayor.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Chief. This has been an extremely difficult week and a half for a very precious family in our community. Their extended family, their friends, and those of us who have just gotten to know them in the last week, sadly because of this unfortunate incident. The first thing I would like to do today is just again express on behalf of the community of Fresno our deepest condolences for the family. And to again urge Fresnans to continue to lift up this family in your thoughts and prayers. We're grateful for this major and important step towards justice today, but we're mindful of the fact that it doesn't bring Janessa back. So I urge Fresnans to continue to remember this family and to do everything in your ability to support them and to continue to support them through this tragic time. Secondly, I want to, on behalf of the people of Fresno, thank the Fresno Police Department. I want to thank our chief for his steadfastness, for his diligence, for the high standard of excellence that he has set for the Fresno Police Department now for so many years. And also want to thank the individuals who have been so intimately involved in helping to bring justice for Janessa. And again, as the chief mentioned, we thank Lieutenant Mark Salazar, Sergeant Dave Ramos, Detective Tony Rivera, and Detective Adrian Alvarez, as well as the other law enforcement agencies that came alongside and in support of Fresno PD over this last week. We can't thank you enough. We're grateful in every way. We're grateful every day, but especially when these tragic incidents occur and we see you do your jobs in such excellent fashion. So please accept our public's appreciation and support for what you do. Lastly, I want to say thank you to this family. Thank you to Stacy Gonzalez, her mom and dad, their extended family, at a time when our hearts are broken on their behalf. And as we extend our support and as we extend our condolences, what we're finding is they're comforting us. They're encouraging us. They've said repeatedly over the last 10 days and just the moments before this press briefing, we forgive these people. We stand against violence, but we stand for reconciliation. Their actions speak louder than their words. So I want to say thank you to this family on behalf of Fresno. Thank you for teaching us an incredible, invaluable lesson of what grace looks like, of what forgiveness looks like. And I heard them say just moments before this press conference that their hope is that that would be the message that comes from this tragic incident. The message of forgiveness and a message of redemption. That is, in fact, Janessa's legacy, and that's what she will always mean to all of us. So with that, again, thank you to our police officers, thank you to this family, and continue to hold them up in your thoughts and prayers. Thank you.
I think it's appropriate at this time to have Stacy come up and speak. And as she comes up here, Stacy, I wanted to say one thing. Early on, Stacy had forgiven these individuals in her heart. And we knew that. She had made that comment publicly. In fact, when our detectives interviewed Brian Cooks, one of the things that helped in that interview was when our detective told suspect Cooks, Janessa's mother, Stacy, has forgiven you. He broke. And then he began to tell the truth. Forgiveness is powerful. And so I want to thank you for that.
Hello. I do. And again, I'm going to hear, you guys are going to hear it again. I forgive them. And I love them. And I hope they find the Lord so they could have peace in their heart. Because now I have my full peace. My baby's in a better place. And I just want us to continue to have peace. Like I said, remember, think of Janessa. She wouldn't want people fighting and being mean to each other. So like I said, learn to forgive. And don't do the same forgive and forget. You know, forgive and yeah, but don't forget Janessa. Thank you.
This time we'll open it up for any questions that you might have. Anyone?
Any suspects show remorse, Chief?
Well, I think when Brian Cooks knew that he had been forgiven by Janessa's mom, as I said earlier, he broke down crying and began to tell the truth. I don't know if that's showing remorse or as much as feeling a sense of obligation to tell the truth. But at least at that point in time, that was a breaking point in the interview.
And what does it mean to you? I know you've invested a lot in this case to finally have these arrests made.
Well, anytime you have a 9-year-old girl shot and killed in your city, and you're the police chief responsible for preventing those incidents from occurring, as well as making sure that that case gets solved, there's an incredible amount of pressure that not only I feel, the entire organization feels. But I also felt deeply hurt and saddened that something like this had to happen, because the truth of the matter is it didn't have to happen, and it doesn't have to happen again. We are a community, unfortunately, whether we like it or not, that has a significant number of gang members. These gang members aren't born. These gang members evolve. And it is so important that we as a community do everything that we can to prevent these individuals from getting into gangs, and doing everything we can to rescue these individuals from gangs. But in the interim, we as a police department are going to do everything in our power to maintain control and to prevent violence in our city. But as I've said many times, gang problems are not just a police problem. It's a community problem. We need parents, we need the educators, we need the churches, we need this entire community to do all that they can to prevent another Janessa in our city. Any other questions?
Well, I have a question, but he can't hear me right now, and I know our reporters who are there on scene will be asking this, and we'll have the answer for you later today on the KMPH Fox 26 10 o'clock news. And that is, of all the 44 tips that came in, 10 of which the police chief says gave credible, strong evidence that brought forward their investigation of these two men, specifically Brian Cooks and Isaac Stafford. Will any of those people receive the money, the reward that was offered in this case? What will happen with that? Aside from the reward of knowing that justice, well, we are at least one major step closer in this justice. And then also find out a little bit more about these men. Brian Cooks, who knew the moment it happened that his bullet did not hit his intended target, but instead hit this little girl. And then after that, he did whatever he could to change his look so that the police wouldn't find him. And then this man, Devontae Murphy, who was caught with Cooks in a traffic stop, and Cooks' gun found on him. Devontae not charged in this killing of the little girl. He was not there, but he was a felon in possession of a firearm. And then Isaac Stafford, 19 years old, also a gang member in Fresno. And it's the feud, the grudge between him and Cooks that led to this whole thing. A grudge that both of them have carried since 2012. One of them being called a snitch in a previous murder case that sent someone else to prison, has now looks to be sending him and Brian Cooks to jail and a trial for the death of a little girl. Thank you. And there's the little girl. But this is a time of strength in our community. This is the first time, I think this is why it's so touching. This is the first time in all these years that Mayor Ashley Swearingen has been our mayor. And she has gone to witness pain in so many different parts of our community. This is the first time I ever saw her break down. Sadly, this is not the first you've seen me break down, so I apologize. Again, our team is working very hard on this story to continue to bring you the latest on this case. The latest on this story and all your day's news and weather can be found on our website, kmph.com, and tonight on your KMPH Fox 26 10 o'clock news. Take good care.